I thought you might be interested in this. It clears up a lot of confusion when it comes to the Great Prophetic Week. Of course, what I'm referring to is this week of 1,000-year days that God has overlaid on the plan of redemption so that from start to finish, from the creation of Adam, I like to say, to the creation of a new heavens and a new earth, this whole plan of redemption spans a period of no less than 7,000 years, divided up into days, which is what the prophetic nature of the account of creation in the book of Genesis is all about. God could have spoken it all in one moment. He could have created that quickly. It didn't require any length of time because nothing is impossible with God. But there is a special reason why he chose to frame the creation story in a prophetic snapshot, if you will, picture of this great week. 6 days of work, a seventh day set apart, called holy, or separate and distinct from the other six, which is the seventh day. It's also called the last day of the great week. And we understand that biblically speaking, God also refers to it as the third day. And the reason for that is that he's counting not from the creation of Adam so that you have the 7 days, but he's counting from the start of Jesus' ministry when he was 30 years old, so that day 5, 6, and 7 now are days 1, 2, and 3 in terms of the Messiah, his first coming and when he will come again. So it's focusing in on this last part of the week, which prophetically speaking in the Bible, these 3 days are called the last days. If you want to know what that phrase means, that's what it means. You can't understand the phrase apart from the 1,000-year nature of these days. So, in other words, as proof, we can look at the day of Pentecost with Simon Peter when he stood up and preached from the book of Joel, the prophecy in which God said through Joel, through the prophet, that he would pour out his spirit on all flesh in the last days. Well, the fact that that started or that it happened nearly 2,000 years ago has to mean that the last days were already in motion at that time, at the time of Peter and the apostles, 50 days after the resurrection of Jesus. They were already in motion. In fact, if you want to delve into it, that's not part of what we're going to discuss right now, but you can, let's just say it. In times past, God spoke to us through the prophets in the Old Testament times. But in these last days, he has spoken and he is still speaking to us through his Son. When has he spoken to us, and is he speaking to us by his Son? In these last days. So in other words, the last days actually began with the ministry of Jesus. When his ministry began, that's when the 5th great day began. The 4th day ended, so that you have the start of day 5, going on to day 6, and then coming to the last day, day 3, which, if you can get this, is also the 7th day, if you all the way back and count from Adam. So here's where you just need to understand how God is using these day terms to give us an awareness, an end-time awareness of where we stand in his plan, where we stand with both the first and the second coming of the Messiah, Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus the Christ. And so in this message for the remainder of it, I'm going to show you how you can understand that the fifth day did not begin with his birth in Bethlehem, as so many have projected. That's why people in our circles that I know of anyways seem to lose interest in the Great Week, the prophetic nature of how critical it is to understanding end-time prophecy. Because if it happened during his birth in Bethlehem, if that's when the fifth great day actually happened, then you would count 2,000 years for 2 days, days 5 and 6, and that would bring you to the year 2000. 2000 is long past. This is now 2021. But prior to the year 2000, we had the Y2K thing, when everyone was all up in arms about what was going to happen at the turn of the century. God had already led me to study the sacred chronology in the Old Testament. And I was aware, I became knowledgeable of the fact that the fifth great day did not begin when he was born in Bethlehem, but when he launched his ministry 30 years later. So I understood that the 2 days or the 2,000 years did not start with his birth. That's not where you start counting from. But it started with the launch of his ministry when he was 30 years old, approximately. The Gospel of Luke tells us that. Now, when was that? It was AD 26, 27, 28. We don't know for sure because no one has proven with no shadow of a doubt whatsoever when he was born, whether it was 2 BC or whatever. That's our best understanding when we put all of what we know now with the Bible and with history together. That seems to be most accurate. But in any event, we would start counting from 30 years later, which is when he started his ministry. And here's why. In Galatians chapter 4 and verse 1, I'm just going to begin to read and then comment and explain what this all means. But it begins by saying, "Now I say that the heir, as long as he is a child," get that, in the Greek, it's the word that would mean a child, does not differ at all from a slave, though he is master of all. In other words, what he's saying is this child is the heir. And right now he doesn't look like it. It doesn't really act like it. And he's not really treated like it because he's still a child, a little kid. But he is the heir. And so if you look at him in juxtaposition or along with the other children his age who are not heirs, then you don't really see any difference. But he is the heir. So, verse 2, he's under guardians and stewards until the time appointed by the Father. Even so, we were in bondage under the elements of the world. Now, here's the part, verse 4. But when the fullness of the time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law. Sent forth his Son is a different word than child, which we just read. And the two are used here so we can understand and see the difference, because God did not send forth his child, his newborn baby, into the ministry. He sent forth a fully mature son at age 30, which, as I understand it, is the age you're eligible for the priesthood under the law of Moses. So here it is that we commonly read this passage and we think that God sent forth his Son from heaven to be born among men, and that's when you start counting day 5 and then day 6 leading up to day 7 or the third day. But this is telling us something different. The word here for time, the fullness of the time, is chronos, which means the chronological passing of time. And so if I'm 30 years old, the chronos of my life right there is that I have chronologically fulfilled 30 years. And so here it is, in the fullness of the time, the Chronos had come, particularly with respect to his son. He sent him forth into ministry. He sent forth a mature son. Now this links with Isaiah 61, wherein Jesus, when he launched his ministry, he opened to the scroll of Isaiah intentionally. This is also recorded in Luke 4:18. And he opened the scroll which says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the good news to the poor." Get this next part. He sent me to heal the brokenhearted. And you could keep reading it that way. He sent me to open blind eyes. He sent me to set captives free. He sent me to open prison doors. He sent me to preach the acceptable year of the Lord, the year of Jubilee, the favor of God, this gospel of grace. So when did he send him? When he was a mature son, when he was 30 years old. And that's what I found the sacred chronology of the Old Testament, when I studied it out, verified and confirmed. In another video, I show you that Jesus confirmed it just in one sentence. Anyways, saving us all of the trouble if we had known. But he basically told them in the prophetic oracle that he spoke over his ministry, and told them to go tell Herod, that fox, that Jesus, as the Messiah, would cast out devils and perform cures for 2 days, a today and a tomorrow. And on the third day, he would be perfected. So there it is, 2 days of supernatural ministry leading up to this third day, in which he and his body, his church, his bride, would be completed. It's just like the temple. Destroy it and I'll raise this building of living stones up on the third day. So 2 days for searching out his bride, 2 days for building this temple of living stones, in which he is the foundation and the capstone. Hallelujah. And 2 days for growing and maturing his body, because on the third day he will come again, and we, he, him, us, however you want to say it, Christ the head, and we his body, his church, we will be completed. And so this is what he's saying, and it began when he was 30 years old. So therefore, those who would discontinue using or talking about the Great Week and 1,000-year days, they need to go back and understand what I've just said, because it is critical to understand. The last days, the 1,000-year days in particular, are still part of the game. They're still in the play. So nothing has changed. We haven't gone way past it so that obviously it wasn't true. No, it's still in the game. We're still looking at a great week of 1,000-year days. And that tells us here in 2021 that if, for instance, his ministry began in 28 AD or 27 AD, whichever, add 2,000 years to that for days 5 and 6, and you'll have arrived at the third day, the start of it, the start of what Jesus called the last day. And that's significant because he attributed the resurrection, a first fruits resurrection of those who are his, when that day begins, the last day. Resurrection is the bridge when he comes and raises the dead, and we who are alive and remain are changed. And so he must do that at the beginning of that last day, the seventh or third day, however you prefer to note it. He must do that so that the promise that we would rule and reign with him is fulfilled. So 2,000 years from, let's say, 28 AD puts us at 2028 AD. That's the latter part of this decade. This is 2021, so we're only looking at 7 or 8 years left until he comes for his bride to begin the process of restoring all things, which will require 1,000 years of ministry. We will rule and reign with him from the Father's house over the earth in fulfilling this last 1,000 years. Yeah, your assignment is going to change from preaching this gospel of grace to those who are around us, and then we will be caught up, we will be changed, we will be glorified, we will be formally and experientially seated at the right hand of the Father, and then we will begin our next assignment, which is to, as it says, sit with him as the Father puts all things under our feet, every enemy, the last one being death itself, which is put under our feet at the end of the 1,000 years, which is why you can find a statement about this last day, this last 1,000 years, where it says if a sinner dies at 100 years old, people will consider that equal to a young child today dying. In other words, you died at 100 years. That's it. You only lived 100 years. You were so young. You had your whole life in front of you. That's what we would say if someone dies when they're 5 years old or 6 years old. And this is telling us that will be so during this last 1,000 years. A sinner may die at 100, and instead of celebrating it and saying, oh, they actually lived to be 100 years old, wow. No, instead it will be, that's all they lived? Just 100? Oh my, their whole life was cut short. That's the difference as we're reigning from above, and God through us, he works through us, putting every enemy underfoot, but it's God that's doing it. So the point of this sinner dying at 100 is to show you that there is still death happening, not as often, not as frequent as today, but there is still death. There are still people who die during this last 1,000-year day. That tells us that death and the enemies of God will not be completely put underfoot, or at least death won't, until the end of this last day. So all of that to show you where we stand, how close we are, how soon is soon. It's a relative word, but for generations in the past, God was looking at 1-2 days. They were 1,000 years to us. But in our generation, soon is taking on a normal meaning. It's taking on a meaning that would be soon to us. A few years, a handful of years, that's soon. We're no longer just limited by God's perspective, but we're coming to the end of the 6th day, and we're ready to begin this last day. So I hope this encourages you. I hope this helps you understand. Don't give up on the great week. It's still a viable part of God's plan, and we still need to be talking about it even more as we see the day approaching. That's how you see it approaching, along with the signs that say it's approaching. We can literally see the day approaching in terms of chronological time, God's time, because it is the 7th and the last day. So, amen. God bless you, and we'll see you next time.